Ora, and welcome to another episode of Both Sides Now. Today we are really excited to be joined by Qiulae Wong, the leader of the Opportunity Party. Thank you so much for welcoming us into your home. Qiulae is a mum of two and someone who's now positioning herself as the next generation of political leaders in New Zealand. Qiulae has an extensive background in business, particularly in sustainability in the business world, and has also spent a bit of time overseas. Born and bred in Auckland, she took over as the Opportunity Leader in November 2025. So, Qiulae, welcome to the podcast and thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, kia ora, welcome to my house.
I guess we'll just sort of start off with, where do you and where does the Opportunity Party sit philosophically?
Oh, we'll go right into it. A really easy one.
Let's go in hard.
Well, this is a tough question for us because we don't really believe in this left-right spectrum anymore. I don't think it accurately actually represents the way people see themselves. For example, we talk about being pro-business and pro-environment. Typically, pro-business tends to be seen as a right-wing thing and pro-environment tends to be left, but I think you have people that straddle both of those worlds. So I guess an easy way to explain it might be centrist, because we sort of work with both sides. We particularly in New Zealand want to see less division and more just following the evidence and focusing on what kind of future we want to build for our next generation. And so I think starting with any kind of philosophy or ideology when it comes to politics is a bit of a dangerous thing to do, whether it's far left or far right.
And so I guess politics for so long has known the left and the right and sort of people can kind of fit into boxes, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah.
Do you think that's part of why people struggle a little bit with the Opportunities Party over the years? They can't kind of quite place you, because I feel like a lot of people won't necessarily always know who the candidate is they're voting for, but they know the political party, they know the left or right, they know what they stand for. Do you think that's been a problem that...
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge, and I feel that people are very tribal out there, and we get criticism from both sides. But I also think there are lots of people who are looking for something that is a bit more pragmatic. There's, you guys doing this podcast and the popularity of that, and there's other things like cross-party lines and the Three Gals and Beehive. It's all about actually what is the common ground, what are the similarities that we have rather than the differences that tear us apart. And maybe we've kind of gone a bit too far in that polarization, and it's time for us to come back to the middle a little bit.
Would you say that when we've had changes of government from a Labour-led coalition to a national-led coalition, that those swings have been too far?
Not always. I think there has been periods in history where it's been more stable. I think sort of the early 2000s, up until the John Key, Helen Clark era was a bit more stable. They of course had differences of opinion and they, fought it out on the political battleground, but I think we saw less radical sort of swings from left and right. And to be honest, I think we tackled more big challenges in those eras than we do now. Now it seems like we get distracted by all these fringe issues that become culture wars that enrage a few people at the extremes, and everyone in the middle is just sick of hearing it. So I think we're getting to that point where my hope and my belief is that there is a silent majority in the middle that wants to just get on with building a great country.
One thing we've spoken to in the past is this grievance politics, and I think perhaps we see a little bit of that with some of these more social issues that I personally wouldn't see as issues, for example, defining what a woman or a man is. So where does that sort of sit into this sort of polarization and this extreme side of things, and why do you think Opportunity might be able to tackle that?
So I think, those kinds of issues, that one in particular, I think New Zealand First is an expert at this, finding a group of people that are feeling really aggrieved by something and kind of going all in on that. But actually it represents quite a small portion of New Zealand society, and it tends to be those small groups that are really vocal, and that's what we end up seeing on our news, really sadly. That's what dominates most of the narrative, is these issues. I think you don't want to discount the conversation around transgender and transgender rights, but I don't think that that's New Zealand First's intention here, is to have a meaningful conversation. It's actually to get the votes of those people that are really outraged, and to sow more division, because that's how they're being successful at the moment. But yeah, as I said, I have a firm belief that there are lots of New Zealanders that don't want to see that, and they don't want that to be the dominant narrative in our politics.
And so you've spoken a little bit to the characteristics, I guess, of a New Zealand First voter, which I can completely agree. New Zealand First, pick an issue and go, okay, we know some people are going to be are upset about this, and it's going to run on because they've only got to appeal to a small percentage of the population. What do you think the characteristics of an Opportunity Party voter would be? Like if someone said, well, I don't know if I would want to vote for you, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think we've done a lot of work on this recently in particular, because obviously if we want to break beyond that sort of 2.5 mark that we've achieved in the past, we need to appeal to a broader group. And actually looking at it, it's not super surprising. It's urban professionals, usually with families, young kids, or thinking really about the future. Young people that might be working in science or technology sectors that are thinking about innovation. I think that is the sort of stereotypical opportunity supporter. We are kind of a party for nerds, we love our policy, we love to do good research, we do love a spreadsheet and a graph. We're not shying away from that. That's who we are, and I think that's why people, when they actually read through the policies, they're like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, and there has been a lot of thought that goes into it. We're not trying to cherry pick these issues, the total opposite of New Zealand First. We're trying to find the big things that we can actually, change about the system that will improve New Zealand as a country. That's not always the populist thing, and that's our challenge. But I think that those big issues have now become so important for New Zealand. Our economy is clearly creaking. Climate action is being neglected, and those are the big things where I think opportunity shines. And so I think what we're seeing is those voters who, I'd say that they're frustrated and they're future focused, and that's the common thread that brings them together.
It's funny that you say they're a party for nerds, because I actually think that in my flat of 5 of us, I think that pretty much I haven't voted for the Opportunity, but I think my 4 other flatmates have either all voted for or considered voting for the Opportunity Party, and I think anyone who comes to my house would consider us all nerds. But I think that's quite interesting, because I feel like I know a lot of people of my age, and it's probably just the sort of people I socialise with, but a lot of people you talk to are like, oh yeah, I'm going to vote for the Opportunity Party. And then I feel like we were all quite disappointed that at the last election it was like, well, such a letdown. We thought you would have got a lot closer. I personally quite liked Raf. Why do you think that you guys have struggled to get past that?
I mean, it's been too much of that focus on the things that the nerds love to talk about. And while there is, as I said, we're not going to shy away from it. That's always still a part of who we are. This election, it's more about branching out to, the young parents and even the grandparents and, my parents' generation that are really worried about what kind of New Zealand we're leaving behind for grandkids. We call them kind of good ancestors. And I think understanding what the kind of key issues for those groups of people are, where do they hang out, how do we reach them, how do we engage with them, and just listen to what's top of mind for them, that's a huge priority for us in the next 5 months.
So how does Opportunity target or appeal to those people who kind of feel a little bit alienated or not necessarily heard, feel like they have that representation in Parliament?
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky one, because there are lots of people feeling pretty disenfranchised at the moment. I don't think we can necessarily appeal to all of them and tick all of their boxes in terms of what they're looking for. But we are certainly seeing, I think that there are lots of young people that feel disenfranchised. They don't feel like they trust government anymore, which is really sad. So specifically going out to, to universities and kind of youth groups to understand what's bothering them, and trying to translate, I guess, our policies and our thinking into what they're feeling. For them, that just looks like not being able to get a job, not being able to afford their grocery bill. And we need to kind of connect that to some of the solutions that we're bringing to the table and how we think that might help.
And are you finding as you start to go out, are you getting more reception this time around, do you think? Do you think there's kind of a bit of a movement building as opposed to the last few times that the Opportunity Party's had a go?
Yes, definitely. I wasn't involved in previous campaigns, but certainly even from the outside, it feels like we're in a much stronger position. And talking to people that have been part of previous campaigns, so people like Jess Hammond, who's a candidate who stood at every single election for Opportunity, she's said that at this time really does feel very different, and just even like tracking the number of media articles. Our membership numbers are the highest they've ever been in history. Our donations are doing really well. So it certainly feels that we're starting from a much higher base this time, and we've still got 5 months to go.
Yeah, and sort of speaking to donations, you've just reached the Match Fund May.
Yeah.
Most donations I think you've received to
Yeah.
date. You've also got a policy about targeting political donations,
Yeah.
sort of cleaning up politics and making it seem, or limiting some political donations, making it a bit more transparent.
Yeah.
Perhaps, as you said before, putting a little bit more trust into our institutions. So what are your personal thoughts about political party donations, and what does that reform sort of look like?
Yeah, and we are super committed to this. You know, even when we get in, we will still continue this, even though it might not serve us in the long run. You know, that's why current parties don't support these sorts of changes, because that means, for example, the National Party might not be able to take $11 million of donations that they did last year. So for us, what that looks like is limiting political donations, both in terms of what an individual can give. So that could be capped at something like $10,000 or $20,000. You know, we have benefited from some $50,000 and $100,000 donations, so that would mean we could no longer access that. But I think it would even the playing field across all the parties. There's also things around what different parties get from the Electoral Commission. So everyone gets a broadcasting allowance. At the moment, that's based on how many votes you got at the last election. So National, for example, I think will end up getting, I don't know, 1.4 million or something, and we get about 100,000 because that's the difference in percentage. So it's a real winner's bonus or kind of incumbent's advantage, which makes it really hard for smaller parties to get airtime. And that's basically what you can spend on TV and radio advertising during the election period. So we'd want to change things like that as well.
You mentioned about incumbent advantage. I actually think that at the moment it feels like incumbency is becoming a disadvantage. Do you feel that at the moment? Because it feels like incumbent governments all around the world are becoming increasingly unpopular, because it's not, I don't actually think the current situation is the fault of the current governments around the world. I think it's just they've just inherited generations of a mess. Do you think that might be an advantage for opportunity this time round?
Yeah, there's definitely an advantage not having the baggage of being in Parliament, and we can't be blamed for anything. And we can kind of come in and say we've got all these great ideas for doing things differently. So I think in that sense, from a narrative point of view, it's great that we have that blank sheet of paper. From a resources point of view, though, that's where it's hard, because not only do they have more donations, they also have whole teams of people that are paid in Parliament to help them with, you know, everything from policy development to social media. Whereas for us, that's completely dependent on donations and volunteers.
And on policies, if you do manage to get into Parliament, what would be your one bottom line if you were in a coalition negotiation? Do you sort of, have you got one key policy that you know you would not move on, or?
I think we've got a couple, and it's going to depend who we are negotiating with as to where we can push more, or what we might, you know, where we might get a little bit more across the line. We've been really clear what our priority policies are. So there's 5 key areas that are on our website. So that's energy, oceans, tax, productivity, and citizens' voice. I think something like, I mean, obviously Labor's come out with the capital gains tax. We think that a land value tax would be more impactful. So we might be able to get a little bit further on that with them. I think energy is something that both of the major parties need to do more on, and I think are open to doing more on. We think we've got some great ideas in there for that. Certainly we would want to be using our leverage, not just to get our ideas across the table, but to get them to commit to working together. So for energy, for example, say it's a Labour-led government, we would say you have to genuinely work with National and ideally all the parties to build a long-term energy strategy, because the last thing we want is for then in 3 years' time, the next government to come in and wrap it all up, because that is what's creating the biggest problems at the moment.
I totally that. I think both of us were pretty disappointed when the current government gutted the Zero Carbon Act, and particularly because at the time it was really seen as a great bipartisan attempt at trying to tackle climate change.
Yeah.
So I guess a bit of a chance here to speak to some of your climate policies, but what my main question is how is the Opportunity Party that voice of compromise?
So I think in that circumstance, I think it's so important that we have a party or multiple parties that can represent the environment regardless of who's in power. And imagine if it had been National and the Greens or National and Opportunity the last 3 years, and that might not have happened. And, with regard to the Zero Carbon Act, I was working at KPMG doing that climate reporting with so many businesses. And yes, it was painful. Lots of them didn't want to be paying us to be coming and helping them with that. But we were starting to turn a corner and we were really making traction. And we were world leading in some of the stuff we were doing there. And then to have the brakes kind of put on completely is really frustrating. And so I think what Opportunity would do in that situation is really try and hold National accountable and try and work with them to find ways to, clearly they're trying to please a certain sector of the business community. What are some other ways that we could do that? Can we provide more training or education, resources to help them kind of ease that burden, limit the kind of the FMA sort of regulation on that so that they don't feel as stressed by it, but actually to unwind some of that Zero Carbon Act, I think is, was not the right step.
What personal skills do you think you bring to the table? Because I think it's a wonderful thing to say we're going to try and get Labour and National to work together in the wider Parliament, but there are some incredibly difficult characters across the House.
Yeah.
What do you think that you're going to do differently to try and get them to work together?
Yeah, I think I've basically been doing this in business for the last 15 years. Working in sustainability, you do have to be that bridge between, the sustainability teams are often wanting to do things differently and they're trying to push against the status quo, which, tends to be short-term profit incentive. So it can be really hard. And I feel like I have experienced that from lots of different parts of the ecosystem. I've been part of the storytelling of how you can do things better. I've been part of the activism of trying to, push against the status quo. And then I think, more recently at KPMG, it's like trying to work with inside the machine to understand what are the drivers that are driving the status quo to continue, and how can you work within that to meet people where they are. And I think that's what we have to do ultimately, is meet people where they are and help them to kind of see in their own minds what the benefits of a low emissions world might be, for example. I don't think going in and screaming at National and ACT and saying, you guys are wrong and one day we're just gonna have our way and you'll be gone. It just doesn't, that's not how it works.
Kind of changing tact a little bit now. We'll switch to a little bit of tax discussion. Okay, so kind of changing tact a little bit now and speaking to tax, which I know is a big one for Opportunity Party. What do you think needs to change in New Zealand's debate about tax?
Well, I think we need to be open to having a debate in the first place, and just see it as a conversation. And it's obviously, it's big for any country to make big changes to their tax system. But we've known for a long time that we have real challenges here. We've got things like the looming cost of an ageing population, our housing market, which is getting harder and harder for young people to get into. And we know that we have a really narrow tax base in New Zealand, so we don't tax a wide range of things. And property is obviously the big gaping hole for us, where most other OECD countries have a capital gains tax or a land tax, or both in some cases. And so firstly, it's just an openness to having that conversation and recognising that, our intention for anyone shouldn't be to try and punish people for following the system that has existed for the last half a century. But we do need to build a better future for our kids that's more stable and more affordable. So I think that's the starting point. And then the second is sort of looking at what should our tax system try and achieve. We obviously want to make, public services more available to more people. We want to make, we want to incentivize the kind of behaviour that will make life more affordable. So I think that is things like taxing income less and taxing assets more. And in our case, we think that shift needs to be onto property more. So our tax reset kind of has two big chunks. It's the citizens' income and the land value tax. Citizens' income is a weekly payment made to all adults over the age of 18. You can kind of think of it like super for everyone, because we kind of do have a universal basic income for over 65s and superannuation. And so bringing that down to 18. And then that's balanced by the land value tax. So people that own property, they'll probably end up being about neutral. They'll receive some citizens' income, they'll pay some land tax. But for people that don't own property, they'll be significantly better off. And I think particularly what we've seen in the last decade or so is the cost of living just continue to rise and wages not keep up. And so that really gives those people a break, helps them get ahead, and I think will create a more cohesive and productive society for all of us.
But as somebody who doesn't own property, what makes this citizens' income or UBI type tax policy better than targeted spending towards specific peoples and communities like disability support or housing assistance or job seeker benefit?
Yeah, so and to clarify, we would keep some of those additional top-ups for things like disability support and housing supplements, child support. That would be on top of a citizen's income, recognising that there are some people that need more than a basic $370 a week to survive. And so I think for someone who doesn't own property, ultimately it's a lot, you'll end up with more money in your back pocket. You'll take home more of your pay. It's essentially, we do have some changes to the income tax brackets, but overall you would see a big increase in what you take home.
Yeah, cute. It sounds very appealing. I will not lie. But I do have a caution though, because at the moment it feels like we've got a real issue when it comes to our superannuitants. And obviously Treasury said we need to up the superannuation age or else we're paying, I think, 32% or something else in GST. So how will we be able to afford citizens' income if it feels like we can't afford superannuation as it is now?
Yeah. So the tax policy that we've created is all costed out. We've modelled it on the numbers that we have from Treasury and Stats NZ and things. And so we've built it in a way that creates a surplus. So there's actually $4 billion extra per year that's generated from the land tax than is spent on the citizens' income. Our proposal would be to spend that $4 billion on partly paying down debt, partly funding other services, whether that's health, education, other things that need more funding. So we can afford it right now if it was all implemented in full. As well as that, we've also proposed a KiwiSaver 2.0 scheme, which is a compulsory KiwiSaver. And it would take some time to get to that because, we need employers to adjust and the market to adjust. But ultimately, we think we need to get to that point, the same as like they have in Australia. And with that, we might be able to start means testing super eventually because people will have had the chance to save enough. You and I will have our whole careers ahead of us that we can save, and maybe by then we might not need government super because we've got enough put away in our own savings.
Yeah, I'm personally a huge fan of compulsory KiwiSaver and then start to phase out superannuation. It's outrageous, I think, our current system. And as someone in our generation, it's like a massive concern we have to bear the burden. I think what's the statistic was there were 7 taxpayers every one superannuitant when it came in the not too distant future it's going to be 2 taxpayers every one superannuitant. So it's getting outrageously expensive. What I'm interested to kind of talk about in terms of the tax policies, I guess a criticism that's being that can be of your tax policy that it's kind of still focused on just redistribution of wealth rather than kind of, I guess, the contrary, which I guess is like just looking more broadly to grow the economy. How do you think that this redistribution is going to help to raise incomes and to help grow the economy?
Yeah, I mean, it's just everything is interconnected, right? We can't solve everything with tax. It can do a lot, and what it can do is shift money out of housing and into businesses, shares, infrastructure. If we're not investing in rental properties to save for our retirement, we'll have to put that money elsewhere, and that's ideally we'll go we've got Sam Stubbs with his InfraKiwi scheme and things like that, which could be Kiwi owned amazing projects that will actually drive productivity for New Zealand and help grow the economy. We've also got another whole bunch of policy ideas around productivity and how we grow that way as well. The kind of key thing there being more investment in innovation and R&D. We talk a big game in New Zealand about being the country of innovators, but we've got really low investment in R&D right now. It's much lower than the OECD average. And if we don't invest in that science and technology pipeline, we won't have the rocket labs of the future. And it's tricky because it's a long game. And again, it's that long-term thinking that we have to apply because if that pipeline dries up, we'll continue to see productivity flatline.
How do you sell that long-term thinking to, the family down the street who are just struggling to pay their mortgage and put food on the table? Because I think people primarily just vote based off their back pockets, how they're feeling at the time.
Yeah.
How do you get this message out, and how do we get people to think not just what's in front of them, but 10, 20, 50 years down the line?
Yeah, I think it is really hard. I think we are at a particular unique moment in history where we've got the benefit of hindsight, and I think that's kind of what we've done for the last 10 or 20 years is vote with our back pocket on what do I think is going to improve my life tomorrow. And that's how we've had this increased populism, the increased swing between left and right, because everyone's promising the world, but nobody's actually tackling the big issues. And so I guess right now we can point to that and say, this is not going to work. It might feel tempting, and it might feel like, you might get $20 extra in your pocket for the next couple of years. But the reality is we know that's not building a better future for our kids. And I think the other thing that's missing at the moment is just that vision, the long-term vision. Where are we going?
Yep.
I look at all the other parties and I can't really articulate the kind of 2050 New Zealand that they want to create for us. So I think that's another big thing that we're really focused on is how do we build that vision together? How do we create something that all New Zealanders want to get behind and are willing to put in the hard yards for?
In terms of creating that working together mentality, do you think that that's something that could be achieved by your Citizens' Voice policy?
Yes, very much so.
Could you explain your Citizens' Voice policy for us?
Yeah, so Citizens' Voice is so the idea of citizens' assemblies, essentially. And the way that they work is you take an issue that usually something that politicians are really gridlocked on. So superannuation would be a good one. Do we raise the age? Do we means test? Do we have a compulsory KiwiSaver? There's all these different options on the table. Nobody's willing to budge. You bring together a representative group of citizens. So if it's a nationwide thing, you want to accurately represent the demographics of our country. It might be 100 people in a room that get to deliberate the options over maybe a series of weekends. They get presented with all of the evidence, all the different options, the pathways, and then they have to sit down and talk to each other. And it's not about trying to kind of ram one idea down each other's throats. It's about, you and me having a conversation about what do we think is actually going to work best for us. And if you take superannuation for example, you might have a retiree who's completely dependent on super, sitting down with someone who's just leaving university and has got their whole life ahead of them and is going to have to pay tax to support that person. If they can really come to a solution together, I think that creates a much more lasting, enduring decision than politicians kind of trying to play back and forth with it.
How would that be any different than Parliament though? Because the point of Parliament is they're meant to be representative of New Zealanders, right? How would that actually work any differently? And because surely that would still be susceptible to lobbying and susceptible to people still, doing what's in their best interests. And, how would that actually work any differently to what our Parliament does?
Well, I think with Parliament, you've got there isn't a genuine attempt to find common ground. One of the ways, so citizens' assemblies, where you need to get to is ultimately you want to have 80% of the people there agreeing, not necessarily that the decision is their first choice, but it's something that they can live with. And once and actually they tend to get to that. So Ireland have done this with marriage equality. Auckland did one with water care on the future of their water sources. The recommendations from that water care thing got adopted completely by the water care board. And so what happens is the people in the room can come to an agreement around, okay, 80% of us at least can live with this solution going forward. So it's much more likely to stick. That's not really how our Parliament works at the moment. It's just one side trying to get in and ram through as much legislation as possible under urgency until the next team comes in and undoes it all. I don't think that the way our select committees work is really about genuinely trying to find common ground. So that's what we'd love to see more of.
So do you think then that Parliament doesn't doesn't necessarily do as good a job of representing people as what we think it does, or maybe that system in itself is broken as well? Because I think if Parliament did its job, surely there would be no need for these sort of citizens' assemblies, right?
Yeah, I disagree. I think that they can play a good role regardless, even if you've got Parliament working well. Because the other thing that they help to do is engage citizens. So rather than just going to vote every 3 years, or maybe every 4 years if we extended the term, you've got people that are aware of the issues because there might be a citizens' assembly once or twice a year, so there's something for them to debate, to get engaged with personally, and it helps us understand our fellow citizens a bit more because we're forced to understand these different perspectives. Whereas I think at the moment we sort of, we do in some way just forget about it and we go, well, we'll leave it to the politicians. But they're clearly not solving these big issues for us. And I think the more engaged we can make citizens, the better. It works really well in countries overseas. So Switzerland probably has quite an extreme version of this. They have quarterly citizens referendums, and they vote every quarter on an issue. And actually what it does is it engages people in democracy, but it also keeps politicians on their toes, because if they introduce something that they kind of know the majority of people will be against, then it's pretty easy for citizens to kind of rally against that and vote against it quite quickly. So I think it helps as a sort of check and balance on Parliament as well.
As you can see, the thing that it might work, because New Zealand, we've only got the single house, right? We haven't got that extra check and balance of a sort of another level of things they have to go through. We've got the executive, this is nerdy political jet, but essentially the executive runs the legislature, so it's very much, there's no sort of check and balance. Parliament, what the government wants, the government generally gets.
Yeah. I love that framing. I might have to steal that. it's kind of like the people's house.
Well, essentially it is, right? We don't have an upper house, but it kind of isn't that other check.
Yeah, so it is another check and balance, let's say, seeks to strengthen democracy in New Zealand. I'd put to you, and I think you might agree, that it also might prevent politics from devolving into that sort of unhelpful, harmful, divisive rhetoric. And I think what we're particularly interested in is that you sort of have a little bit of a citizen's voice on social media at the moment, but that can really quickly become misunderstood. We get dis and misinformation a lot. So I guess, how do we prevent politics beyond just the citizens' voice policy from getting to that point in light of where we are with social media and its impacts on democracy today?
Yeah, it's totally, I think that there is a direct correlation between the rise of social media and the increase in division, and it's really sad. And there's a lot that the platforms, I think, have to answer for there. So I think that work can be done to steer those algorithms towards a more inclusive, less harmful approach. I think it comes down to our leaders having to show the right kind of leadership and setting the right tone and culture that we want to represent as a country. But there are also quite cool digital tools that can be used, similar to what a citizens' assembly achieves, but online, where you could say it's a national conversation on a particular topic. You can have everyone engaging online on that, and it almost works the opposite of what social media does, which sort of puts you in your echo chamber with people that think the same as you. Some of these tools sort of intentionally show you lots of different perspectives so that you're constantly having to recalibrate and think about things in a different way, and then it sort of brings everything together in a single place. So I would love to see us use more of those kinds of tools, and that's, it would be amazing if the government could take the lead on something like that.
I guess, speaking to you personally now, you're the mum of 2 young kids. How has being a mum, and I guess looking at their future, influenced you as a politician and influenced you wanting to become a politician?
Yeah, I've always been interested in politics. I studied it at university, and then went into business because I felt like it was a more innovative, creative place to try and drive change. I've always been interested in the social impact side, and that's what I've done through the private sector. But I think having kids definitely has made me a lot more impatient for that change. And that's really what's driven me to want to take a step into this slightly scary world, because I don't want to live here and raise my kids here if I don't feel like it's going to get better. And honestly, we came back in 2022 from London, and it was good. We had good jobs and lots of our friends were here. But certainly last year, my husband and I were starting to feel a bit like it just wasn't, I don't know, just the vibe was not great, and didn't feel like the most exciting place to bring up our children. And we had talked about going back overseas last year. Now I'm doing the total opposite, and we're stuck here. So hopefully we can get into Parliament and make some change.
And I guess, how have you, and I guess a bit of a personal question, but how have you found the transition to being a politician? Because obviously when you're in the business world, to an extent you can kind of switch it off and you can take holidays easily and that sort of stuff. How is that sort of, personally, how have you found that change into politics?
Yeah, I've worked in startups and I've worked in big corporates, and I've never worked this hard in my life. But it doesn't feel tiring, because it is really enjoyable. I get to meet so many amazing people, get to travel to all corners of this country and see what's, the beautiful places that we call home, and understand what are the big challenges facing people. So that part of it I absolutely love, and I feel like is a real privilege. But yeah, it's a lot of work, and it's really demanding, and it's tough on the family. I'm away a lot more now, and so we have to adjust to a bit of a new routine. I hadn't really thought about this going into politics, but now that I'm in it, I feel like if I could make it easier somehow for young parents to be in politics, then that would be something I'd love to accomplish during my time working in this space.
It's actually an interesting point about young parents, because obviously at the moment we've got the report that's recently come out. We've got, I think, our population is 1.55 is the average number of kids people are having, so we're not even replacing the population. Being a young mum who's has had a successful career as well, what sort of policies do you think you could put in place to help convince people like Alex and I to have children? Because at the moment we're looking at this world, it's super expensive to bring up kids. There's not a heap of support in place for wanting to sort of work while we have kids.
Yeah.
And it's just really, it's really expensive. Like, what can you see? Policies would you like to see, or would you like to have seen when you were at that stage as well?
Yeah, I think citizens' income is a big one, because that actually recognises, so in India, for example, they've actually introduced a UBI for women, because they recognise the unpaid role that women often play in society as caregivers, as, sort of looking after children and the home. And so I think if people were receiving a citizen's income, that would give them a bit more freedom to take more time off to have kids, a little bit more money in their back pocket to afford groceries for a bigger family, and school uniforms and petrol and all those kinds of things. So I think that would really help. I think when it comes to our education sector as well, we have seen quite a big sort of corporatisation of early childhood. And we are totally, we have sent both of our kids to daycare. Even this morning I was, you just get in this mindset of like, I don't have time to look after my kids. I've got to drop them off to this thing, and we're paying an arm and a leg for someone else to look after our kids so that we can go to work, and something around that feels a bit wrong. So I do think to see some kind of more empowerment but put back into the hands of parents to spend more time with their kids, I think would be great.
Yeah, I love that. I agree. Switching again now, I wanted to speak a little bit to MMP. Of course, this year we're celebrating, is that the right word? 30 years of our mixed member proportional system. Now, I'm not entirely sure if MMP, in some sense, is opportunity's best friend, perhaps because due in part to the 5% threshold. Personally, I wouldn't mind seeing it come down to 4%.
Yeah.
We'll have a look. I guess, what's your stance on the 5% threshold?
Yeah, I think MMP versus first past the post, we definitely wouldn't exist if we still had first past the post.
Yeah.
So we would love to, obviously we think that lowering the threshold to 4 would be good. I think that would still be a high enough bar. We have never received over 4 in an election before, so it's still tough, but it helps with that kind of wasted vote mentality a little bit. And I think what's really sad recently is that we now have this left block and a right block, and we've kind of almost gone back to this first past the post mentality where people are voting for a coalition rather than the party that they most align with. again, looking to overseas systems, I think it's in Germany or might be Switzerland again, where the parties actually work together on different pieces of legislation all the time, and that's completely normal. And I think then you end up with kind of greater stability in legislation going forward. So yeah, we would love to see kind of, and even in New Zealand we had, when I was at university under John Key, he worked with the Greens and Te Pāti Māori, and that kind of more cross collaboration of parties would be good to see.
Yeah, it definitely does feel almost presidential, very that sort of United States, I guess, influence of Democrat, Republican, left, right, red, blue. But I guess as well, there's also been this introduction of framing of the coalition as you speak to. This year, it very much seems like the choice is the coalition that we have now, perhaps with a few minor tweaks and changes, or Labour, Greens, Te Pāti Māori sort of coalition. What do you think would increase opportunities, chances of getting elected if you, I guess, identified left or right? Noting because, I would put myself in the left, the green box, Eve is the right, the blue box.
Yeah.
Together that makes teal. So
does make teal. We feel really strongly that holding that centre position is really important, and having a party that can work with both sides. So we will not pick a side. Obviously, if we're in that position where we could be, forming a coalition, we will have to pick a side. But that will ultimately come down to who can most align with our policies and our values. So as tempting as it is to kind of say that we are left or right so that we can feel like we're part of a tribe and collect all the votes that come with that, we completely lose our leverage, and we completely lose our sense of identity as a party. We are firmly focusing on the future and what's going to take this country forward. The thing that I say to, often I get questions from people saying, well, we don't want to vote for you because you said you might go with the other team or, the other side. And to that, I would say, well, if 50% of the time it's going to be a Labour or a National-led government, whichever side you're on. And if it's the other team, wouldn't you rather that it's a party like us that are holding them accountable than the extremes that are going to pull them further away from what you believe in? And so I think I do strongly believe that there are a good swathe of New Zealanders that want to see that.
yeah, clip that. Again, on the sort of like lens of MMP, last election, the Opportunities former leader, Raf, went pretty hard for Ireland.
Yeah.
You're standing in Mount Albert this year, and I think you've got about 30 other candidates going for electorates.
40 something.
40?
Yeah.
Wicked, that's awesome.
Yeah.
There was Opportunity had a pretty hard run for the Ireland electorate down south, and this year you're standing in Mount Albert. You've also got a plethora of other candidates running in electorates. So I guess how important is strategy when it comes to targeting electorates, and how do you shift voters' mindsets from just ticking the red or the blue option?
Yeah, it's huge. We've had to think about this a lot, and we've learned a lot from previous campaigns. Raf did really well, and he came a good, credible second. I think he got about 10,000 votes, but it was a really blue seat, and so it was hard to shift some of those people. And then the other thing we learnt from that is that when you put all your eggs in that basket, if you come second, even if you come second by one vote, you lose everything. And so that party vote is really important for us. Our support is spread across the country, and we think we can get that 150,000 votes from people all across New Zealand. So that really is our number one goal and number one strategy. In saying that, we have just launched a 2-tick campaign for Mount Albert, which is where I'm running. And we have thought about that extremely carefully because we don't want to detract from that nationwide campaign. We also don't want to pull too many resources from all of the stuff we've got to do around the country. So partly it came down to funding. Do we have the resources to do both a Mount Albert and a national campaign? Thankfully, we'd still love to raise more money, but we do feel like we've got enough. We've got enough team members, we've got enough resources to do both. So I am going for Mount Albert to be the next MP for Mount Albert, which feels great because I live here and I want to feel like I can give it my all. But I think it also helps from a strategic point of view, because if people see there's a real chance that we win Mount Albert, it brings our party vote threshold down to 3%. And we've just polled at 3.3% already on the One News Varian poll, which is, that's a good, credible one for us. So if we won Mount Albert and we got over the 3%, we'll have 4 MPs in Parliament. So I think it really helps from a strategic point of view.
Any talks doing a deal with National or Labour?
No. I mean, again, it would really undermine our positioning and our credibility to pick a side before it comes to, if they want to stand the MPs down, let us have it. Sure. I was
going to say, if Chris Hipford comes to you and says tomorrow, look, we won't run Helen White, she's the current, Helen White is not going to run this time round, but on the condition that you will come into coalition with us, would that be something you'd consider?
No, we wouldn't promise them that. Yeah, ultimately it will come down to what is in that coalition agreement. We're not going to just take a seat at the table for anything. If we feel like we have to compromise too much on our values, we won't enter into a government agreement. We'd rather be in opposition or sit on the crossbenches or have a confidence in supply agreement. We're backing ourselves to deliver for our voters, and I think hopefully that will pay off.
And how is having someone like Ian Lees-Galloway, who's obviously a previous Labour minister, but just someone with that wealth of political knowledge, whether I would agree with them or not, how do you think that's helping this time round with sort of the way the campaign's shaping up and how the party's going?
Yeah, so helpful in so many ways. I think he understands what a political party needs to run, like the processes, the infrastructure, what team members we need, where we should be putting our resources, all those kinds of decisions. To have someone who has been inside a big machine like Labour is really useful. And then I think from that strategic kind of communications and narrative perspective as well, it plays a big role. And he's sort of openly said that he always felt like he was more on the centre end of Labour, so I think he's found a home and opportunity as well, and so that really works for us.
What's been the biggest thing you've learned in your sort of 6-month, very quick political learnings?
I have learnt to trust my intuition a lot. I think particularly as women, we tend to not trust our intuition always in work, but things move so fast in this world, you just don't have time always to analyse all the data. And so we have to trust our instincts and know that we are in these positions for a reason, and sometimes you just got to make a call and hope that it's the right thing.
Building on from that, then, you obviously spent 6 months travelling around. What do you think the biggest problem facing New Zealand is? I know this is a hard question. We've discussed lots of issues, but if you're going to put your finger on one.
Just one.
Yeah, I know. And they are all interconnected. And if you're going to give the politicians' answer, if there's many, but if you're going to...
I'm going to have to pick 2 that are sort of interconnected. I think one is the vision piece, not having a clear idea of where we're going. And the second is we've lost those spaces where people can talk to each other. And I think those are hurting each other, because the less we talk to each other, the less we have a cohesive vision that we're all aiming for. And so we need to invest in our communities so that there are places that people can go, that they can talk to their fellow neighbours, but that also, again, links to the cost of living and things. If we can take some of that pressure off people, they'll be more open and able to speak to each other. When things are tough, it's pretty easy to retreat to your shell, and so I think making life a bit easier for people would really help with that. But I think if I was just to pick one, it's the vision piece, because I think if a government can really set an inspiring, hopeful vision for New Zealand, that's what people are really looking for.
Yeah, I agree. I guess as we begin to wrap up, give you a bit of an opportunity to really give your pitch as to why opportunity is the party people should vote for this year.
It's really simple, really. I think we have seen over the last 20 years that flipping and flopping between left and right is not getting us anywhere. It's not tackling the big issues that we need to face. We've got big things ahead of us. We need to fix up our economy. We've got climate change pressures, we've got AI, joblessness on the horizon, we've got a world of global volatility that is not going to calm down anytime soon. Do those old parties with their old ways of thinking really have the tools and the mindset to navigate us through those challenges? I don't think they do. I think that we need a party like Opportunity that's bringing some fresh ideas and is going to shake things up, be a circuit breaker, and get everybody on board on a new track for New Zealand. Forget the old track, this whole back on track thing. Let's build a new one. That's what we're good at in New Zealand. And if people want to see that kind of change, they have to vote for it. They can't be strategic. They can't hope somebody else is going to do it. They have to vote for Opportunity on November the 7th.
I think that's a great pitch. No, and I understand like the back on track thing is such a strong point. You know, like the world is changing drastically. The world as we knew it for the last 80 years is no longer that. So I think, you know, we need a new track. Yeah.
We've underfunded the track.
Too expensive house prices.
It's an old road, actually. It's a road with a lot of potholes.
We spend more money on cones than the track, let's be real. Yeah. Oh, well, Qiulae Wong, thank you so much for being here. Well, I guess we're here in your lovely home. It was awesome to speak to you, and all the best for the next 5 months.
Yeah, thank you. It was really great.